Good evening and welcome to the Safe Space with Bobo Nene. This is where we unpack the complexities of loss, in particular grief through widowhood. We look at different dynamics that exist during the journey of widowhood, as well as what the Word of God says about the journey of grief. I am your host, Bobo Nene. And tonight we are tackling the topic, loneliness versus alone. Learning to sit with your soul. If you have ever felt the pain of an empty room, the silence after laughter had gone, or the haunting question that normally follows death, who am I now post the death of my husband? If you have answered yes to these questions, the topic we are addressing tonight is for you. I remember it so vividly. Right after my husband's funeral, the calls slowed down. The comforting messages stopped, and eventually everyone returned to their lives. But I did not. I had to face a house that felt foreign, the kind of silence that wrapped itself around everything, the furniture, the walls, even my skin. I have always been someone who enjoys quiet moments. I actually value stillness. In fact, when my husband was still alive, we lived in Cape Town, and some Saturday mornings, I would often sneak out of my house for a peace walk by the Muizenberg beach in Cape Town, just to be with my thoughts. Sometimes I would take my journal to reflect and write, or simply to have a moment to breathe and be away from all the chores that a wife normally does. This silence that I'm speaking about, the silence that I was dealing with after his funeral, this was not the kind of silence and peace I enjoyed. This was a silence I did not ask for, one I did not invite, and yet it came in. It took its shoes off. It made itself comfortable. It was loud in the most unbearable ways. There were days I would be surrounded by people at work, when attending social gatherings, for example, when I was doing my shopping, and I would still feel completely unseen. The loneliness didn't care where I was or who I was with. It showed up. But the hardest moments, the weekends, the holiday seasons, especially December, when the world slowed down to celebrate, mine stood still in grief. Work, my escape place, my distraction. During these holiday seasons, it closed its doors on me. And I was left alone with the very thing I had been running from, the pain of my loss and the shadow of loneliness. I put on the strongest face I could. I smiled when I was expected to. I nodded when people said, you are doing so well, Ntombi. But inside, loneliness was sitting beside me like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. And no matter how loud the world got again, loneliness stayed. I did not want that silence, but it became my greatest teacher. It showed me things I did not want to see, but things that I needed to face. That silence, that loneliness, it tried to define me. But eventually, I began to realize something powerful about it. there is a difference between being lonely and being alone. And in that shift, I began the slow, sacred journey back to myself. What is this loneliness that I'm speaking about? Loneliness is not the absence of people. No, I had lots of people around. It is the absence of connection, of purpose, of presence. I really like what Mother Teresa said about loneliness. She said, and I quote, "Loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty," unquote. I really understand and have a lived experience of the realities of widowhood. The bed that feels bigger. You sometimes, as a widow, even forget that you do not have to set a plate for your husband at the dinner table anymore. The sound of your own voice starts feeling a little bit foreign and strange. What we need to note is that loneliness is grief's echo, still calling out, hoping someone will answer. Loneliness is a wound, not a weakness. And wounds are meant to be acknowledged and not hidden. You know, being alone is different from loneliness, because being alone can become sacred. Being alone is space. Being alone is rest. Being alone is presence with yourself. I remember when the shift happened for me. It was one afternoon. I do not really remember the exact date, but I remember the shift that happened. You know, at that time, I was so tired of dealing with depression and loneliness. I really felt the physical tightness of grief. My house was completely quiet that afternoon. I was home alone. There was no background noise from the TV, no music, just me and the stillness that I felt. At first, I felt that familiar pain rise up. The one that used to hit me hard every time I realized my husband was not coming home. That dull, suffocating pain, that's the kind of pain I used to feel. But this time, something was different. I did not reach for the TV remote. I did not get up to do something that would distract me like I normally did. I stayed with the stillness and wrapped my hands around the glass I was holding in my hand because I was drinking water, and let this silence hold me. And somewhere in that silence, I heard something, not out loud, not dramatic, but inward, inside me. I heard the real me for the first time after the death of my husband. Not the wife, not the mother, not the usual host who made sure everyone else was okay while visiting my house. Just me. I had self. I realized I did not really know this person anymore. I did not know myself anymore. This person that I was sitting with, this person called me, I did not know anymore. For so long, my life had become, about caring for others, loving, serving, and giving. And those things were beautiful things. I do not regret them for a moment. But now I was alone. And for the first time in a long time, I was not filling the space with someone else's needs. I was filling it with my own breath, with my presence, with the truth. And in that small sacred moment, I heard my soul whisper something. I heard my soul say, "You are still here and you are more than your pain of loss." Wow. I had not let my soul say anything in years. And yet in the stillness on this afternoon, in my empty house alone, I allowed my soul to say something. And what my soul said was so profound. What my soul said that day is what made me have that moment I call sacred. I cried, not, the painful grief kind of cry, but the kind of tears that came when something began, to come back to life. That moment didn't fix anything or everything, but it marked a beginning of becoming, of remembering who I was before the roles of being a wife, a mother, and imagining who I could become after this loss. I am reminded, of examples of great people that discovered great things during the moment of being alone. Luke 5 verse 16 teaches us that even Jesus Christ himself, would withdraw to be alone and prayed. We know that Jesus Christ never went on any missionary work without being alone and withdrawing for a moment of silence to pray and be with the Father. Maya Angelou, a well-known poet, author, and activist, after experiencing deep trauma and years of silence following her abuse, Maya Angelou spent time in solitude, reading, writing, observing. It was in that isolation that she found her voice again. Her time alone became the foundation of her memoir called "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings," her work that changed the world. Her experience with being alone teaches us that sometimes healing begins when we face the silence and decide to speak from it. Another great example, Frida Kahlo, a Mexican painter. After a terrible accident that left her bedridden and in chronic pain, Frida turned inward, both physically and emotionally. Her time in solitude became the space where she painted some of her most iconic and personal works. This teaches us that creativity often blossoms from places of pain. And when you are alone, your soul has room to speak through its gifts. One of my favorite authors, Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love. After her divorce and emotional collapse, she chose to travel alone, spending time in Italy, India, and Bali. She says it was not the travel that changed her, but the quiet moments she spent truly being with herself. What Elizabeth is teaching us with her book, Eat, Pray, Love, is that sometimes healing starts when you dare to befriend the person you have been avoiding, which is yourself. As you go through the journey of grief and the journey of widowed, I invite you to take a moment and reflect. What do you notice about yourself when no one else is around? When was the last time silence felt safe instead of scary? Learning to sit with your soul is about listening without wanting to fix anything. Listening as you allow your emotions to be, to appear, to be there without you judging them. Making space for who you are becoming. One thing we need to remember is that our soul is like a child who just wants to be held, who wants to be recognized, who wants to be acknowledged, not rushed, not judged. In the midst of the pain you might be going through right now, what is your soul trying to say to you? In the stillness, we meet the parts of ourselves that grief could not kill. You are not broken because you feel lonely. You are human, but being alone that does not have to mean being lost. I would love, as I close, to hear how this podcast landed with you. Please share your thoughts in the comment section, or you can even send me a WhatsApp on 082 726 2197. Remember also to share the link with someone that needs to hear this message. You are never truly alone when you learn to sit with your soul, because in that space you begin to remember you are still whole. I thank you for taking time just to listen to this podcast, and I hope that transformation for you will start when you make the decision to take time and face this pain, to take time to be alone, to make being alone that sacred space. Good night until we meet again.